Hi, I'm Mike from 1A Auto. We've been selling auto parts for over 30 years.
Use a pry bar or a large flat-bladed screwdriver to remove the hubcap. Just going to slide it under the edge. Put that aside. Take a breaker bar and a 21mm socket and loosen the lug nuts while the car is still on the ground. Raise and support the vehicle. Now you can finish removing the wheel. These lug nuts are pretty loose, so I'm just going to use the socket, take them off. I'm removing the last lug nut. I'm just going to hold on to the wheel so it doesn't fall off. Take it right off. Start by removing the two caliper pin bolts, one on the bottom, one on the top. There's a 14mm. Actually broke free without having to use the mallet. If it's tight, you can take a mallet, just tap it, break it free. Just squeeze the caliper a little bit by pulling it out. Should slide right off the pads. Take a bungee cord, just hang it up and out of the way. So I'm going to use a small pry bar, or you can use a flat-bladed screwdriver. You need to pop them away from the brake rotor out of the caliper bracket. Remove the caliper bracket bolts. There's two at the back, one on the top, one on the bottom. They're 14mm. Be in there pretty tight. Use the box wrench and a mallet to break them free. Gonna get the bottom one loose and work on the top one. So they're broken free. You can switch to a ratcheting wrench. Pretty loose. Just gonna remove the bottom one with my fingers. Put that aside to reuse it. And get the top one out. Pull the bracket out. Bolt out. This car is missing a rubber plug that goes in the rotor here. The rubber plug is so that you can access the parking brake mechanism to release it. So somebody just put some duct tape over it. I'm going to peel it off. Inside here is the mechanism. I'm going to try to pull it off first though, because sometimes it's loose enough you don't need to release it. Parking brake's not on, it is spinning free. I can spray some rust penetrant around the hub. A little bit in here. Take our dead blow mallet. I'm going to hit around the edge here to try to break it free. Sometimes you'll get lucky. These might come off, but they usually get stuck on the parking brake shoes. You need to release the adjustment. It's very hard to see right now, but through this opening, it normally has a rubber plug on it. It had some duct tape on it. We removed it. Take a flat-bladed screwdriver. I'm going to spin it. Try to grab the little tabs on there and spin it up. It's like a little wheel. Make sure I'm going the right way. You can check. Oh, see, I went the wrong way. It locked it. So it's going to actually be spun down. Basically just have to spin that wheel down and keep retracting the parking brake shoes in so the rotor will come free. When you adjust it, you're going through the rotor and into this hole, and then you're pushing down on it. And that spins the parking brake shoes in to release them. Before we remove the rear wheel bearing and hub assembly, it has an integrated ABS sensor. It needs to be unplugged. On the inside of here, there's a lock. I'm going to use this small flat-bladed screwdriver to push the lock in. And then I'm going to grab the sensor connector and wiggle it back and forth. It's probably jammed up with dirt and it gets stuck. You just have to kind of wiggle it back and forth and then it'll come off eventually. But you want to be very careful not to break this. You see the dirt coming out of it. Put that aside. I'm going to use these openings in the hub so that I can stick a 17mm socket and an extension in through and break the bolts free that are holding the hub on. That wasn't too bad. Just gonna spin it around here. Find this lower one. Just gonna keep spinning the hub around to get to the different bolts. Pretty loose. Spin them out by hand. It's okay if the bolt stays in there and get it out afterwards. So the hub bolts are out. It's probably seized in there with a little bit of rust. I'm going to take a dead blow mallet and try to knock it loose. This hub and wheel bearing is seized in the bore. I'm going to try taking our old rotor and throwing some lug nuts on here. Let's see if we can use this like a handle. Take our mallet, just try to knock it loose. I hit this with our rotor attached and it pulled it all the way out of the knuckle, which is fine. So this is the back side of our wheel bearing and hub assembly and the connector for the ABS sensor. It has rusted into the backing plate for the parking brake assembly. So it's sort of seized in here. And it's come completely out of this knuckle. You can see the rust in here. It's a little tricky. It should just pull out in a perfect world with no rust. So I'm going to take a bungee cord. Just sort of hanging up by the coil spring here, take some of the tension off of our parking brake cable. But I need to separate the hub assembly from this backing plate and the parking brake assembly. So it's pretty rusty. I'm going to take some rust penetrant and just spray it around the edge. And I'll take a pick. I'm going to try to break the seal a little bit. Just try to free some of this rust up. Hopefully work a little bit of the brake parts, work a little bit of the rust penetrant in here. Take our dead blow hammer, try to knock this out, see if it works. Since we're smashing this with a hammer, you probably won't be able to reuse it if you're replacing this part, but we're doing the hub and bearing assembly anyway, so it doesn't matter. So I'm going to switch to a ball peen hammer, got a little more power to it than the dead blow. We're trying to knock this free. This just won't come apart. I'm really mangling it, trying to hit with the hammer. I've actually damaged the hub now, it won't turn. I'm going to bolt it back here in place so that I can remove the parking brake assemblies and then put it in the shop press and attempt to remove this hub and bearing assembly. To cut down on some of the brake dust that's in here, I'm going to take some brake parts cleaner before I remove all the hardware in the shoes and clean it out. All right, to remember how this goes back together, I'm going to use my phone, take a couple pictures of it. to take some needle nose pliers and remove these two springs up top that are holding the brake shoes on. That one. Pull this adjuster piece out. Put the spring back on it just the way I found it so I don't forget how that went together. So now the shoes are just on these little retaining springs and the hardware that's underneath them. These are usually pretty soft springs. They're kind of keyed, so you can turn them by just kind of compressing them. Sometimes you have to reach in the back and actually hold, they call it a nail that they're held onto. You can actually hold the back of it so it doesn't get pushed through. These pliers in here. Push it down and attempt to turn it. Oops. Put those springs aside. The shoe should come off of this. Grab this little washer too. Saw this down. This is the auto adjuster. That side, so I don't lose it. I'm going to repeat the same on this side, remove that little spring and retainer. So you can actually take this is, they call it a nail because it looks like a nail. You can actually take this out, put that aside. Same exact thing. There is a tool for this, but there's actually not a lot of clearance in here to get the special tool in here to push these in. So the pliers work pretty well. Lower this all down. Take this little nail out. That's interesting. This one has a little special taper to it, so that's the other side. So now this is your parking brake cable. So let's try pushing this way. Got one part of the needle nose on the end of the cable and one on this brake shoe arm. Pop it this way. It almost worked. Pull the e-brake or parking brake cable out of the backing plate. There's two 10mm bolts. I'll loosen those up. They're pretty rusty. I did spray some rust penetrant on the back side of them first, but now that they're separated a little bit, I'm going to spray some more, help work it down into the threads. Sometimes it helps to tighten them once the oil's in there, and then work it back out. There's one. There's the other one. It should separate through. We'll just place that aside. So now you can actually see where our hub and bearing assembly is a separate piece from this backing plate, but it has seized in here. So now that I'm done removing all the brake parts, I'm going to take it back off here and we're going to go to our shop press and attempt to press it out. And I guess I can do this now. I'm going to spray a little rust penetrant. Maybe it will work itself in there, maybe not. It's a pretty tight fit. Hope for the best. I can unbolt it from the knuckle, and it's going to be totally loose, so I don't want to drop it. We got it set up here in our press. Got a bearing press tool. I'm just going to try to press it out, see if this works. Going to attempt to heat up the metal and the plate. I've released the pressure on our shop press, and you can see there's still some smoke coming up in there. That was from the rust penetrant. I basically heated around this plate here, this metal, to try to get this metal to expand and release from the hub and wheel bearing assembly. Touching it with the handle here because it's still really, really hot. I'm gonna let it cool off for a little while before we go to try to take this apart. It did actually drop while I was heating it. You can see now this originally was not touching this metal plate, it was touching the back of the hub and bearing assembly, so it pushed it, and now it's spread out. And you can just see up here it separated itself from this backing plate. So now there's a larger gap there. I'm going to spray some more rust penetrant in there. All right, I've switched to a smaller diameter press piece so it doesn't get caught on the outer steel piece here. So I'm going to try to keep pressing it out. I'm not too concerned if this has gotten bent. It's just thin sheet metal. You can straighten it back out afterwards. Here's our original hub and wheel bearing. It's been damaged from us taking it out. Here's our brand new one from oneauto.com. You can see the where the ABS wheel speed sensor is. It's got the correct connector. This one, of course, has been mashed in and melted from heating it, but it's got a brand new one here. This spins nice and free from hitting this one. It's been jammed up. You can see this machined bore is the same exact on the new one. It's a very, very tight fit, and what happens is this one has rusted in place, and it doesn't take much for this rust for it to get stuck in place. We've got the same 4 mounting style holes, same bolt pattern. Got these openings so that we can mount, so we can get through and mount the bolts in that's going to hold it in place. This should fit great and work great in your vehicle. Definitely an upgrade over this broken old one. Before I install this onto the new hub and bearing assembly, I just want to take some emery cloth and clean up this opening, any extra rust that's in here, so the bearing slides in nice and easy. When I install this on the vehicle, the hub and bearing assembly is going to slide right through, just like that. So normally, if in a perfect world where there was no rust, when we went to replace this, it would have just slid right out. Take some more emery cloth and just clean up in here any of the loose rust. I have one of the bolts handy with a socket extension, because this doesn't really have any way to stay in place. It has to be placed onto the hub and bearing assembly, which it will only go in one way. It lines up. Top holes are wider, bottom holes are narrower. Slide it into place. I need to spin this hub assembly too. bolt through. Get these snug, and then I'll come back and torque them. Torque the 4 bolts holding the hub and bearing assembly in place to 59 foot-pounds. I go in a cross pattern. I'm going to put the e-brake cable back in place. Through the backing plate, there's an opening here. Reinstall the small 10mm bolts. They're very small bolts, so once I get them, feel them get tight, I'm just going to stop. These brake shoes are in good shape. We're not going to replace them. If you did have to replace them, you would reuse this arm. This is what gets pulled when you push down the parking brake pedal, and it spreads these shoes out inside to lock the brake rotor. To replace it, you'd spread apart this clip and slide it off this pin. Then you'd swap this over to the new brake shoe, put this clip back on, and squeeze it back together. That's really the only major thing you have to do. Other than that, you just replace the same hardware that we already have and put it back together the same way you took it apart, which is what we're going to do now. I need to get the e-brake cable back into this holder here. Let me try some locking pliers. I don't want to crush the spring, so I'm just going to set them so they don't pop off. Release these now. I need to attach this spring that goes on the back side, this retaining spring. I'm going to get it into place. So this rounded part of the shoe is going to fit on this pivot point here. This nail or retainer for the brake shoes has this bend in it, so it's offset. So it comes through here, and then it's offset so that it can go around this and sit in here. I'm going to install it from the back. Just hold it in place. Slide this assembly up. Sometimes you have to hold the part from the back. A little nail to slide this little cup in there. Take our retaining springs, that over the little retaining part. Try to line up the slot on the top of the pin to that wide opening, and then you turn it to lock it. You may be able to use the opening in the hub here to help go through and set up the retaining spring. Just want to make sure that this is pushed in and turned so that it's locked in place. On the inside of the opposite brake shoe, there's the same type of little hook part. I'm going to hook the spring on to the inside of that one, and then hook it onto the inside of this one. Put the shoe into place and attach the retaining spring and nail. Take these pliers. Get that one hooked in place. So this is the adjuster that when it turns out, pushes the shoes out. So you adjust the tension on the shoes. It also automatically adjusts as they wear. This spins nice and frilly, so we don't need to clean it up. But I need to install it in place before I get too far. It sits right in here, and it's gonna sit, pull this shoe up And it's going to sit just like that. You put the other side, the nail goes through the back. You can see it better on this side. Make sure that this little retaining tab goes into this little hole over here. Put that in place. Reinstall the spring and the seat, just like the other side. This plate here with the spring, put the spring back on it, slides in to the parking brake arm and shoe. Just separate this one a little bit apart. Just get it lined up. It fits together like that. These springs have a hook. The hook is going to go around this portion here, and they have this end here is going to slide into the opening to the bottom of the brake shoe right here. That in place. Grab them with pliers, pull them down and over that pin. So just make sure that that shoe fits in that slot and compresses that spring, because these two shoes should be resting on this pivot point here. So just making sure everything's connected so all of our parking brake hardware is now in the correct place. Reconnect the electrical connector for the ABS sensor. There it is, didn't make a loud click, but it clicked and it locked in place. Install the rotor backwards. Take brake parts cleaner and clean off the oil that comes on these so they don't rust while they're shipped. Flip it over. Make sure you install it in a way that this hole lines up with one of the openings here so you can adjust the parking brake. I'm taking the caliper off of our bungee cord. I'm going to take one of the old brake pads, take a C-clamp, and now what I'm going to do is gently compress the caliper to push the piston into the body. And that way when we put our new pads in, it'll slide right together. Rest the caliper like that. Take a brake parts cleaner, clean it off. Reinstall our caliper bracket. Get the top one caught first, it makes it a little bit easier. I can install the bottom one, it's a little easier because it just hangs on the top one. Reach in behind here. Get that bracket lined up. Use the 14mm ratcheting wrench to snug these up. Install our new pads. Just take some brake parts cleaner. Make sure they're nice and clean. Brake caliper grease on the ears of them. Inside and outside pads are the same. I'm going to start with the inside pad. Place it in the bottom clip. Push it up into the top clip. Snaps into place. Do the same for the outside one. So we're just kind of following the curve of the pad too. They're contoured. So the wider part is going to match up with the wider outside part of the rotor. Same as the inside part. Just push them down into the clips. Squeeze them together. Place the caliper back in place. Reinstall the bolts. these up. If they don't get tight, I will stop. I torque the caliper bolts, 46 foot-pounds. You need to adjust the drag on the parking brake. You can turn this so you can see the adjuster, and then you can put your screwdriver in. Just catch the little gears in the wheel just right. So now that's how you'd adjust it so that it's actually really tight. It's holding the brake rotor. So now you know where the limit is. You want to back it off a little bit by turning it back down. Eventually, if you touch the parking brake pedal, it would self-adjust out, but this way it just gets it closer right away. So now I'm going to reach in and turn it down a little bit. So what it's dragging on right now is just the brake pads, but that should spin freely enough. And of course, when you hit the parking brake pedal, it should come out and lock the rear wheels. Important to note, these lug nuts have a taper. Taper meets the wheel, matches the inside of the wheel. Don't install them with the flat side like this, that is incorrect. Install them with the taper to the wheel. It helps locate the wheel on the lug nut stud. I'm just using the socket and ratchet to bring these down snug before I put the car on the ground. I torque the lug nuts to 76 foot-pounds. I'm going in a cross pattern. Reinstall the hubcap. Gonna line up the opening for the valve stem with the valve stem on the wheel. Just push it in place. Before we start the car, just gonna gently press the brake pedal down, not all the way to the floor, maybe about a quarter of the way, and just pump it. And this will bring the brake caliper piston out to meet the pads because we compressed it. And you'll start to feel it get more solid as it pumps up.
Thanks for watching. Visit us at oneauto.com for quality auto parts, fast and free shipping, and the best customer service in the industry.